Hello and welcome to today's class. Today we'll be discussing on the test 1 that you had appeared. So, the first question was evaluate the policies of Lord Curzon and the long-term implication on the national movement. Now, this is 20 marks for 250 words. Now, things to note down. First of all, we need to divide this particular question into two parts. First, it's asking the evaluate the policies of Lord Curzon and their long-term impact. Means each and every policies have to be evaluated and as well as their long-term implication on the national movement has to be evaluated in the second part. That is how we are going to frame this answer. But prior to framing, we need certain understanding. Now, understanding number one, Lord Curzon served as the India's viceroy between 1899 to 1905. Now, within this, first of all, let us analyze the Lord Curzon's policies. First, in 1898 Act was brought by Lord Curzon. The Lord Curzon's 1898 Act made speaking against the British or provoking sentiments against the British as an offence. This was the first one. But what was its impact? The impact was that it failed to silence the vernacular newspaper from criticizing Lord Curzon's policy. So that was the long term impact. So basically, though they tried to muzzle the freedom of speech, but that was that was not much more effective because the vernacular newspaper they had found a way of criticizing the Curzon and Curzon policy. Next, now the next policy of Lord Curzon was that he was deeply a racist and convinced that Britain's mission is one of the civilization mission in India. Now, Lord Curzon's such criticism strengthened Indian will to bring reforms in the society. And this was also the reason that even during the 1898 to 1905, the Congress government and as the Congress as well as during the tenure of the Mahatma Gandhi, reforms, social reforms especially, were given much focus upon. So this was again the long-term impact upon the India's national movement. Again, in 1899, the Calcutta Corporation Act. The Calcutta Corporation Act was one of the policies of the Lord Curzon. It actually reduced the elected members from India and the British majority were in majority in the legislature. So this is what happened in the 1899 Calcutta Corporation Act. So what happened was that this made the faction of Congress realize that British government were not serious in bringing reforms. Hence, this led to the rise of the extremist faction in the Congress. This is the long term effect. The extremism not just led to the rise, extremism was not just in the Congress, but remember that extremist terrorism also started after this phase. After this phase, we had the Anushila Samiti, we had and other major factions that came up in Bengal where the revolutionary terrorism started. So one of the very reason was that it was also associated with the Lord Curzon policies that failed to satisfy the aspirations of the Indian. Next was the Indian University Act of 1904. See, the Indian University Act of 1904, what it did was that it centralized all the university. That is, it brought all the university under the control of the British government through various grants and etc. But what was the long term impact of this? Now the long term impact was that Indians realized that the college were the one of the major centers where the Britishers asserted the control. As a result of which, during any of the popular movements such as in the non-cooperation movement, the colleges were boycotted. Again, national university was started following the partition of Bengal to promote the Swadeshi. Now this is the long term impact. Now, the Bengal partition of 1905. The Bengal partition of 1905 was one of the major policies of Lord Curzon. His mainly aim was to divide East and the West Bengal for the ease of administration, but in actual he wanted to break the unity. So this actually made the people realize the British policy of divide et impera. Means the British wanted the divide and rule policy. This was the so-called policy that was realized by Indians only when the Bengal partition was declared. Next, Swadeshi movement, that is reliance on the self-made goods and boycotting the British good. Now see, though this Swadeshi movement which started, that is which reliance on the self-made goods and boycotting the British goods, remember that this movement though began in 1905, but in every phase, be it in 1920, be it in 1930s, be it in 1940s, it continued. And this phase was also continued through the Gandhi's Charkha, where Gandhi made people self-reliant in making their own clothes and not depending upon the British good. Now this was the long-term impact. I hope you understood this properly and thoroughly. Let's come to the next question. Next question, it says evaluate the nature of the Bhakti literature and its contribution to the Indian culture. Again, this question has two parts. Now first of all, let us understand these two things. First of all, what is the nature of the Bhakti? First and foremost, it's non-violence. The Bhakti literature was based on non-violence. That is it mainly promotion of harmony between various religious sects. Openness. Its doctrine was open to all people irrespective of the caste, religion, and sex. Next, it was lucid. Lucid means easy to understand. The Bhakti saints propagated the philosophy in the local dialect, hence, it reached the masses. Simplicity. Now remember, lucid and simplicity both are different, not same. Understand this. In simplicity, what happened was that in the Bhakti movement, the Bhakti religious sect, they were not much complicated, just like the Brahmanical religion. In the Brahmanical sect, what happened was that there were many rituals, many everything. But Bhakti movement, it was simplicity. Simplicity based on what? Based on devotion to God. For example, Chaitanya's Chaitanya's Namakirtan. It's simple based on the thing is that ki you have to dance while singing the name of the Lord. Now this is something simple that anyone can follow without having to follow any kind of rituals which were hardly costly and which actually which actually ruined their economy. Now, what was the contribution? Now, one of the major contribution was development of the vernacular language, Marathi, Gurumukhi. This was the contribution of none other than the Bhakti saints. Next, in the field of music, Kirtan, such as the Namakirtan by Chaitanya, as we have discussed, Kavali, Mirabai's Bhajan, etc. In the field of dance, Satriya. Satriya was one of the major field of dance that were introduced by the Bhakti saints. In the field of philosophy, new form of philosophy such as the Advaita were contributed by the Bhakti saints. Understand this. The assimilation of idea. See, the Bhakti saints, what they did was that they enrich the ideas of God in India. We had various sects and they had the various ideologies of God, ideologies of the human being. Now, to such thing, Bhakti ideas were also contributed. Assimilation of ideas of various sects, sense developing the diversity in the Indian culture. So that is what was the contribution of Bhakti sense. Now again I made 5 points over here, and again these are 4 points over here. If you want to add other points, then you are free to do so. Now in this, remember that writing more in points will help us fetch marks. Now point and then you can elaborate in paragraph. Again a point, elaborate in paragraph. Point, paragraph, point, paragraph. So the number of points and the greater the number of paragraph, it would be better for you to fetch marks. Next, third question. The third question was the revolt of 1857 was much more than a mere sepoy discontent comment. Now this question is based on understanding. Let us understand this question. Now remember that the cause of the revolt of the 1857 revolt was due to two things. One was the immediate cause, another was the long-term cause. The immediate cause was the introduction of the Enfield rifle, which had to be beaten before they used. That is, the Enfield rifle, that the gun case was made up of the fat of the pig and cow. Hence, that was the one of the major discontent between the Muslims who served in the British Army as well as the Indians who served in the British Army. But the question says the revolt of 1857 was much more than mere sepoy discontent. It means that it had long-term causes. It's basically asking those causes which were long term and that resulted in the 1857 revolt. Let us discuss one by one. First, we'll discuss the political cause. The political cause of doctrine number one is the doctrine of lapse. See, during the doctrine of lapse, which was introduced by Lord Dalhousie, what he did was that, according to this doctrine of lapse, if a particular king dies without his own heir born to him, then the particular kingdom or the particular state was to be annexed by the British government. Number one. Number two was the subsidiary alliance of Wellesley. Now, Lord Wellesley, what he did was that he used this subsidiary alliance under which British army would serve the Indian kings. When they would be serving the Indian kings, they need to be paid. Now, that payment was made either in the form of cash or by giving some form of territory to that particular British army. What was the result? The result was that this particular subsidiary alliances led to the reduction in the territory of the state as well as their economy as well as their finance. Last but not the least, another political cause was the ill treatment of the Bahadur Shah. See, what happened was that during this period, during the period up till 1857, Bahadur Shah's name were no more struck on the coins. Number one. Number two, Bahadur Shah was thrown out of the Red Fort. And number three, they said that the Bahadur Shah's legal heir or their heir will not be considered to be kings, they will be rather be prince. Now, this was one of the political causes because Bahadur Shah was prestigious and was symbolic, and throwing out of the Bahadur Shah was one of the political reasons that led to the 1857 revolt. Next, influence of the outside event. Defeat of the East India Company in the first Afghan war. Remember that in the first Afghan war, what happened was that the English were defeated when they were retreating from Kabul, and that made an impact that the white race is supreme was totally falsified. Next is the economic cause. Economic cause is the land revenue system. The land revenue system, as we had already been, as we'll look in the last question, and we'll be discussing about the land revenue system in details. But the land revenue system, what it actually did was that it made peasants totally conditioned. They ruined the condition of the peasants. As a result, the peasants revolted. Next, deindustrialization. What is deindustrialization? See, the British started the one-way import of goods. What they did was that they said that we will import free goods to India, but when Indians export the goods to Europe, they would have to pay taxes. Now, this one-way import, free import, and one-way costed export, what happened was that the Indian industry was totally ruined. Hence, the peasants, they had nothing to do, but they started going on to agriculture, and in the agriculture, they were again exploited by the Britishers and the moneylenders. Administrative causes. Again, the administrative causes, look into this, is that you can write about the the administrative causes. I have repeated it in a wrong manner, but in the administrative causes, it will be number one, the corruption of the British government. The corruption of the British government of the East Indian Company, Now, the corruption that prevailed in the East India Company was one of the reasons that most of the Rajas and most of the landlords were fed up. Next is your socio-religious cause. In the socio-religious cause, please remember that British started the widow remarriage, banning of sati, and last but not the least, it was evangelization, means conversion of Hindu people, Muslim people to Christianity. Now, the evangelization process was also there within the sepoys or the British Indian Army. Now, this was some of the reasons that the British policies or the law were responsible for the 1857 revolt. So now, how exactly to write the question? See, Intro, body, conclusion. In the intro, I can simply write Sepoy Mutiny, though was immediate cause of the revolt of 1857, but there were other factors that were building up the momentum. They are all these factors that we had discussed in the body can be written. Now, what is the conclusion? The conclusion, we can simply, you can write that simple conclusion. I will say that the revolt of 1857, that the factors mentioned above were much more responsible for the revolt of 1857. Now that's the simplest thing I have said that you can write. It will also fetch you mark, no issues with it. But the main marks that is fetched is through the body. Now you can also add other forms of conclusions. The answers that you have given, we have checked, and those who have given proper conclusion, we have given the proper marks. Next, discuss the classical music and dance festivals of Odisha in 150 words. Now remember that we need to make justice to the question by writing the answers within the word limit. Going outside the word limit would be difficult for us, and it means that, see, this basically, it's though it says for 150 words, but trust me, this will go beyond 300 words, and kindly do not make it 300 words for 10 marker question. You will lose both mark and you'll lose both time. See, let's come first is to the classical music. First, classical music, music associated with the classical dance, that is your Odissi music. Now we can write about the Odissi music, that the Odissi music is played during the performance of the Odissi dance, accompanied by cymbal, tabla, harmonium and sitar. Simple. Flock dance, daskatia. In the daskatia, what again is that where there is a palya and there is a that is the narrator and there is a supporter. Now those narrator and supporter, they play the important role. They describe day-to-day condition, day-to-day political things. Now daskatia is one of the most popular thing. Again, while playing the daskatia, we have harmonium, mics, this we have tablas to support the background music. Next, in the classical music, again we have the bhakti music, Jaydev's Gita Govinda, Chaitanya's Bhajana. These are also the bhakti music and the classical music of the Odisha. Now the dance festival. Dance festivals, or basically I would say dance. We have the Gotipo. Remember that Gotipo, Odissi are slightly different. They are not the same. Gotipo is the precursor of Odissi. In the Gotipo, the male members used to dress like women and they used to dance. In Odissi is performed by both male and female members. This is the difference. Next, we have the Sambalpuri, in which the popular Sambalpuri sarees are worn and the dance is made. We have the Chhau Nritya of the Mayurbhanj. Now, the Chhau Nritya of the Mayurbhanj, where the people wear the mask and make the rhythmic movements and dance. Next is the Paiko dance. Remember that Paiko is the form of martial art, but Paiko dance is also a classical dance. It's a classical style of dance in Odisha, from the Odisha point of view. Now, this is the how we need to discuss about classical dance and dance festival. Now see, the number of dance you write that's accordingly to that you are going to get numbers. Again, we have the intro, we have the body, and we have the conclusion. In the intro, simply you can write the classical music and dance festivals of Odisha are as follows, or you can write that the Odisha has a rich cultural heritage of classical music and dance. And in the classical music and dance, you can write this. See, if you want to draw this flowchart, it's so far so good so that you do not miss any point. But drawing flowchart within the limited space can cost you time and space. But if the space is not limited, then kindly draw this flowchart. It will add some marks. Next, describe the role played by women in the freedom struggle of Odisha. Please understand this, role played by women. Not in this question, what actually problem was that most of the students have given the example of women and what they did. Now that is not. You need to say the role and what they did. That is how we need to write the question. Over here, we need to mark the keyword role played by women. Now let us see. What's the role played by women? The first role was participation in the popular movements. Popular movements means the Lord Cooperation movement as well as the civil disobedience movement at par with men. This is important. Number 2, emancipation of women. What is emancipation means? Empowerment of women. How was the empowerment of women done? Through the social reform movement. Example, Sarala Devi, who supported women's education and worked against the caste discrimination. Role in legislation. Example, Marathi Chaudhary was elected to the Constituent Assembly in 1946. Social reforms in the society. Women freedom fighter works towards the eradicating poverty, illiteracy and superstition. Example, Annapurna Maharana. I have given the pictures of all the 5 women freedom fighters. So basically, see, understand this question. In the body, you need to say how the women helped in the emancipation of the women, how did they participate in the popular movement, role of legislation, social reform done. That is the role of the women in the freedom struggle. Done. Let's come to the next question. The next question was, the rock cut architecture represents one of the most important source of knowledge of the early Indian art and history. Again, the question can be divided into two parts: Indian art and history. So again, in understanding the question, first of all, that the important source of knowledge for the early Indian art and the early Indian history. Indian art, cave painting, mural, frescoes of Ajanta, Ellora cave. These were the knowledge of the art. Now, rock cut sculptures, example is the Elephanta caves. Indian literature, the Hathi Gumtha and the Rani Gumpha inscription. They give us the idea of the Pali inscriptions. About the Indian history, philosophy of the various sects. It was the philosophy of the various sects. What was the philosophy? Such as your Buddhism, Jainism, Ajivikas. Next, about the Indian society. What was about the Indian society? About the Indian society rituals, tradition, about the about the politics or the polity, that is the ruling dynasty, political patronage, etc. Last but not the least, it gives us the idea of the administration taken up by the ruling class. Example, Ashoka's major rock edict that talks about the what? Dhamma, the code of conduct that people should follow, and that is how they used to administer the people. Now, this is the way we need to write the answer. Now, this is to be included in your body part. Intro, you can make a simple intro, and last but not the least, you can also derive your conclusion from the question itself. Next, land revenue system during the colonial area was much more exploitative. So it basically says that we need to analyze the land revenue system, but from the point that they were exploitative. See, in the zamindari system, what happened was that zamindari system from the cultivator's point of view. Now basically, for your information, let me tell you that the zamindari system was introduced in the Bengal, Bihar. Zamindari system was introduced again by Lord Cornwallis. Now, what was the problem for the cultivator? The cultivator had to pay high land revenue. They had to borrow money from the money lender. Because they had to pay high land revenue, hence they had borrowed money from them. As a result, they become debted. There was no right over the land. Zamindar took less interest in developing agricultural land. For Zamindar, revenue was so high that Zamindar were unable to pay. Rayatwari, for cultivators, arbitrary land revenue, payment of tax in cash rather than kind made them debted to the moneylender, exploitation by the moneylender. The Mahalwari system. Mahalwari system was based on the faulty survey undertaken by the officers of the East India Company. However, the problem with the Mahalwari system was the corruption that prevailed among the officials, as a result of which, again, the farmers had to pay high land rate or the high rent for the high rent as tax, because in the Mahalwari system, the those survey that were taken were completely wrong, and they were had no means what to say. They were means they totally were wrong, and the officials exploited the poor farmers. Now, this is how we need to write from the in the zamindari system, in the Rayatwari, and in the Mahalwari system. Only then you will get at least a 7 marks if you're writing in this proper manner. Now, next question is that why did the moderate fail to carry the conviction with the nation about the proclaimed ideology and the political goals by the end of 19th century? Understand this question. See, First of all, our understanding is that what were the ideology and the political goals of the moderates. See, the moderates, what was it that the British government will be a mean to achieve the welfare of the people of India. According to them, they did not want to get freedom from the British India, rather they wanted the British government to be the means through which the Indians could achieve a better style and a better living, and that the Indian problem could be resolved. And what were the methods used? Constitutional methods of prayer, petition, protest, participation of the elites, absence of common people. Now, what was the reason for the failure of the moderate? So that the people of India did not accept them. Number one was their methods. What was their methods? See, the methods used were unable to meet the political goal. Example, failure of the Indian Council Act in 1892. In 1892, they had demanded many things: representation of Indians, election, and all. All this were totally sidelined by the British government. Next, communal representation through the 1920 Monumento reform. Next, belief of the moderate. See, what was the moderate belief? Was based on the notion that masses were not ready to participate in the national movement. Now, this is a very, very wrong notion that the moderates had kept in mind. Hence, their protest was limited only to the elite class and not to the masses. Next, rise of the extremist ideology. Now, what happened was that the people had realized the true nature of the British government. So they were completely able to see that the moderates were no more useful in fighting against the British rule. Hence, the extremist ideology and the extremist methods of utilizing the revolutionary terrorism and protest were highly praised upon by the people. Next, ideological difference with the extremists. Now, this was one of the biggest blunder that the moderates did, that they had an ideological difference with the extremists, and further what it led was that it led to the weakening of the Congress, which was led because of the Surat split in 1907. Next, failure to identify the carrot stick policy of the British government. See, what the British government did was that it made the moderates promise that we'll come up with this reform, we'll come up with that reform, and actually those reforms that it brought had little or no value, and it really did not help the moderates. So the British, what they did was that they pacified the moderates by passing various acts which turned out to be less useful. Despite now, this is the part where you have understood the body completely. Now, what should be our conclusion? Remember that we need to be optimistic. Our conclusion should always be optimistic. So, this is how I have concluded. Now, my conclusion stands like this: that despite of the failure, the moderates helped in building the platform which helped the freedom movement, or that the moderate, despite of their failure, were able to form an organization, that the Indian National Congress. It was nothing but the efforts of the moderate that they formed the Indian National Congress, and none other than the moderate itself. So these were the certain efforts that the moderate did, though it bear its fruits when there was a change in the leadership at the level of the Congress. So basically, we need to mention the body, but our conclusion should be optimistic. I hope that will be all for today. Thank you and have a good day. In case of any doubt, kindly do not forget to ask.